Good morning, and welcome, everyone. It's good to see you all here today. So today we're going to continue on with exploring the Lotus Sutra. And the chapter we'll be discussing is the site of the Treasure Stupa. The site of the Treasure Stupa. Now, in discussing that chapter, we'll be skipping a couple chapters which go on about other individuals being assured that they will achieve Buddhahood and have a Buddha land and receive a Buddha name sometime in the distant future. But there's one short section of one of the chapters that we'll be skipping over that I would like to read as kind of a preamble to what we're talking about. Without giving context, I'll just read the section because I think it speaks for itself. Medicine King, after the extinction of the Tathagata, after the death of the Buddha, if there are good sons or good daughters who want to teach the Dharma Flower Sutra, the Buddha is talking here, for the four groups, monks, nuns, lay women, and lay men, how should they teach it? Should good sons or good daughters, such good sons and good daughters should enter the room of the Tathagata, put on the robe of the Tathagata, sit on the seat of the Tathagata, and then teach the sutra everywhere for the four groups. He goes on, to enter the room of the Tathagata is to have great compassion for all living beings. To wear the robe of the Tathagata is to be gentle and patient. To sit on the seat of the Tathagata is to contemplate the emptiness of all things. One might say the interconnectedness of all things, the lack of separation of all things. One should dwell in peace with all three, the room, the robe, and the seat. And then, never becoming lazy or careless, teach the Dharma Flower Sutra everywhere to bodhisattvas and the four groups. Great compassion, patience, and an awareness of emptiness or interconnection. So in this chapter regarding the site of the Treasure Stupa, first of all, what's a stupa? Most of you are aware of the term and perhaps have an image in your mind of stupas, but just to reinforce that image, this is one of the oldest stupas known, oldest Buddhist stupas known, and it's in central India now. It was constructed, it's not real clear when it was constructed. By some accounts, it was commissioned by Ashoka, who lived, I believe, about the 3rd century BCE, who was a leader, a great leader in India, who was a dedicated Buddhist follower. And this is still standing. And this is a contemporary image of it. To give you an idea of its setting, the great stupa of Sanchi, which is what this stupa is called, is located on a hilltop. And you can see it in the distance there along the horizon, the great stupa. There's a smaller stupa on the hillside a little bit farther down. And this is from a painting from the mid-19th century by Macy. I doubt if the setting looks like this now, but that's what it looked like then. And probably that's what it looked like around the time that it was built. So a stupa is in a sense, it's kind of a mausoleum. It's a reliquary where either the body or some portion of the body of a saint or a great teacher or a guru is buried. And they had such things prior to the time of the Buddha. But the Buddhist followers became ardent stupa builders throughout India. And as the tradition passed into China and Japan, the appearance of the stupa, of course, was modified. It became more pagoda-like. But the predecessor of the stupa is said to be the burial mound. We had burial mounds here in St. Louis and across the river in Cahokia. So the notion of a mound of earth as a memorial to someone who had died is very old in human history. And the stupa is a refinement of that tradition. So it is something to memorialize, to remember, to honor someone who has passed. So this chapter, the site of the Treasure Stupa, starts off. At this time, a stupa of the 7 precious materials, 500 leagues high. A league is a little more than a mile, so to put this in perspective for you. 500 leagues high and 250 leagues wide and deep, sprang up from the earth in front of the Buddha and stood in the air. It was decorated with all kinds of valuable things. It had 5,000 railings, tens of millions of niche-like spaces open to the outside, and was decorated with countless banners and flags. Garlands of jewels hung from it, and tens of thousands of millions of jeweled bells were suspended from it. From its 4 sides came the fragrance of Tamalapatra, sandalwood, filling the whole world. All of its banners and canopies were composed of the 7 precious materials: gold, silver, lapis lazuli, seashells, agate, pearl, and carnelian. It was so tall, it reached up to the palaces of the 4 kings of heavens. The 33 gods rained down mandarava flowers from heaven as offering to the treasure stupa. Other gods, dragons, satyrs, centaurs, asuras, griffins, chimeras, pythons, humans and non-humans, all these tens of millions of billions of beings made offerings to the stupa with all kinds of flowers, incense, garlands, streamers, canopies, and music, revering, honoring, and praising it. Then from the midst of the treasure stupa that is sitting in air, a loud voice of praise saying, well done, world-honored Shakyamuni. For the sake of the great assembly, you are able to teach the wonderful Dharma flower sutra of great impartial wisdom, the Dharma by which bodhisattvas are taught and which Buddhas protect and keep in mind. It is just as you say, world-honored Shakyamuni. All that you say is true. So it starts off with that description. Now, I think it's clear, and the listeners to this sutra in the early centuries CE, I'm sure would have understood this just as we understand it, as being an imaginative image, not something described by a journalist who happened to be there witnessing this event, but something imagined, something to stir the imagination. And stupas being memorials to, in the case of the Buddhist tradition, Buddhas and ancestors, are a site of remembering those individuals, honoring them, giving them their due, in a sense, thanking them for what they have offered and what we have learned from them, gleaned from them, and gained. So when we talk about frequent references in these Mahayana sutras and also in Dogen's writings to Buddhas and ancestors, who are we talking about? How do we relate to that? How do we relate to that? I think for Buddhists rather, who have come to this tradition, or people who don't consider themselves Buddhists but are interested in it, who have come to this tradition from varying backgrounds. Not all of our Buddhas and ancestors have Indian or Chinese or Japanese names. So who are our Buddhas, our Buddhas and ancestors? Might they be some of our relatives, some of our friends, our peers, as we grew up and currently? Might they be teachers at school when we attended school? Might they be just people we've encountered, even brief encounters sometimes? People who have brought the Buddha's wisdom to us through some manner of skillful means, whether it uses Buddha language or some other language. The wisdom itself is beyond language, a large part of what the Lotus Sutra is trying to tell us. So remembering our Buddhas and ancestors is encouraged in this tradition. I'll just mention a quick anecdote here. By a series of happenstances, I ended up leaving for college as I turned 16 years of age. And it was kind of a tumultuous time in American history and a tumultuous time during my life. And I think in retrospect, I was operating on the edges of sanity, the fringes of sanity, much of the time, and sometimes perhaps falling over the edge. But one episode I remember is that at some point I derived a notion that my consciousness arose de novo, sort of unconditioned, that my consciousness was not subject to causes and conditions, and I didn't really owe anybody anything for it. And as a symbolic act, my grandmother had given me a Bible to take to college. And it had several pages in it, as many Bibles do, where you are supposed to write down your family history, your family tree. These highly decorated pages of the sort of glossy pages at the back of the Bible or at the front. And as a symbolic act, I just tore out those pages, thinking that I had this separate consciousness, not subject to causes and conditions. It's a central delusion that the Buddha talks about, that of a fixed, separate self, not connected. So anyway, somehow I survived my youth, as most people do, not everybody, and was granted the gift of continuing life. But in any case, the act of honoring ancestors and Buddhas is encouraged in this chapter. So moving on in the story, so there's this image of the stupa in the sky there that is miles and miles high. But one of the witnesses to this was a bodhisattva named Great Delight in Preaching. And it's kind of an understatement. He's standing there and he says, a bodhisattva named Great Delight in Preaching perceived uncertainty in the minds of the humans and heavenly beings, asuras, and others of all the worlds who had witnessed this, spoke to the Buddha, saying, "World honored one, for what reason has this treasure stupa sprung out of the earth and this voice come from within it?" Of course, stupas are for people who have died. You're not supposed to have a voice coming out of it. So the Buddha goes on to explain that many years ago, many eons ago, there was a Buddha named Abundant Treasure who made a vow. And he made a vow to appear in a great stupa anytime someone was preaching or teaching the Lotus Sutra, and to praise the sutra and to say, "Well done." So that's why the stupa was there. It's due to the vow of abundant treasure, Tathagata. And then so that satisfies great delight in preaching bodhisattva to a certain extent, but he wants to actually see he wants to actually see where this voice is coming from. He wants to see the Buddha abundant treasure. And there are certain conditions under which this can happen, and the Buddha tends to those. And then the Buddha, I'll read from this section here. The Shakyamuni Buddha, seeing the Buddhas who embodied him assembled together, that was one of the conditions under which he could open the stupa, each seated on a lion's seat, and hearing that those Buddhas all wanted the treasure stupa to be opened, immediately got up from his seat and went up into the air. All four groups stood up, put their palms together, and gazed at the Buddha in rapt attention. Then Shakyamuni Buddha opened the door of the stupa of the 7 precious materials with the fingers of his right hand. From the stupa, there came a great sound like the withdrawing of the bar when the gate to a great city is opened. Suddenly, the whole congregation saw the Tathagata abundant treasure on a lion's seat in the treasure stupa, with the whole body in one piece, sitting as though he were in meditation. And they heard him say, well done, Shakyamuni Buddha. You have preached the Dharma flower sutra gladly, which is what I have come to this place to hear. So the next thing that happens is that the abundant treasure Buddha kind of scoots over in his seat and makes a place for Shakyamuni Buddha to sit next to him. So the two Buddhas are sitting side by side. And this is one of the famous images from the Lotus Sutra is the two Buddhas sitting side by side in this treasure stupa. So what's going on here? Well, first of all, this Buddha, abundant treasure Buddha, who supposedly died a long time ago, is now alive and talking to the group of people, and he's sort of sharing his seat with a living Buddha, who was living at the time. So, of course, according to early teachings, Buddhas are mortal, just like anyone else. So, what is this sort of indication that abundant treasure Buddha was immortal? What is the immortality feature of Buddhas? I think many understand this to indicate to us that the influence of Buddhas and ancestors is ongoing. We carry it with us. We're essentially responsible for perpetuating the influence of Buddhas and ancestors as best we can. And it introduces the idea that whatever is important to us about the Buddha is not dead. It's not just something to be read as history, but it's something to be lived. It's a living, evolving thing. So finally, after there are the two Buddhas sitting side by side, the Buddha then lifts the whole group of, tens of millions of billions of individuals up into the air to witness all this, and they are joyful and grateful. And then the chapter ends in kind of it takes sort of a different twist towards the end, and it talks about how difficult it is to understand the Lotus Sutra. As an example, I'll just take a sampling here. It goes through many examples, but if someone took the whole earth, put it on his or her toenail, and ascended to the Brahma heavens, that would be difficult. But after my extinction, after I die, if anyone hears and accepts the sutra and inquires about its meaning, that indeed will be difficult. I may have messed up that first reading, so I'll repeat it. If anyone took the whole earth, put it on his toenail, and ascended to the Brahma heavens, that would not be difficult. But after my extinction, if anyone hears and accepts the sutra and inquires about its meanings, that would indeed be difficult. This sutra is so difficult to embrace. If anyone embraces it, even for a short time, I will be pleased. The Buddha is talking here. And so will all the Buddhas. Someone who can do this will be praised by all the Buddhas. Such a one is courageous. Such a one is diligent. Such a one is an observer of precepts and follower of ascetic practices. Such a one will attain quickly the unexcelled Buddha way. In the future, someone who can read and embrace this sutra will truly be a child of the Buddha, living in a land that is pure and good. After the Buddha's extinction, one who can understand its meaning will be the eyes of the world for both humans and heavenly beings. In that frightening age, one who can teach this sutra even for a moment should receive offerings from all humans and heavenly beings. In that frightening age, one who can teach this sutra for even a moment. So I think we'll stop there. The themes that came out of this chapter, among the themes, were the theme of honoring, revering Buddhas and ancestors, and of the living quality of Buddhas and ancestors, the living spirit. So I'll stop there with this question: Who are your Buddhas and ancestors? Who are they? And how do we honor them? Thank you for listening. We'll break up into smaller groups and get back together in a few moments.